Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I'm going to have a chat about Fusarium in orchids. There will be a lot of you out there don't want to hear it. There will be some of you who bury your head in the sand and just hope you haven't got it and never see it, and I wish you luck, especially in today's age, because it's about, whether we like it or not, it's about. And what really has brought this to home for me is buying 3 plants from one of the most reputed orchid nurseries that there is, and yet they still had Fusarium. So you've got no guarantees, quite honestly. I think it's a cost-cutting exercise, and routine systemic fungicide type treatments are getting pushed to one side now, on the grounds that if the plants can be grown on and got to bloom fast enough and got out the door to sell, they don't need to bother, so they're cutting costs. It's outrageous, but I think that's what's going on. I can't prove it one way or the other. But I want to start by looking at this plant. This is Miltonius Sunset. Now, during last year, 2018, this was a star performer. It grew vigorously, and the new growths produced 1 or 2 spikes absolutely with regularity throughout last year's growing season. It was a star performer, but effectively it filled its pot, which is good. But it got to the time, and in fact in December, to put a time scale on it, that it needed to be repotted and possibly split up. And when I got it out the pot, basically it naturally lent itself to being divided. And if you divide an Oncidium type or a Cattleya type, it's an ideal opportunity to look at the oldest part of the plant and think to yourself, is it time to remove this older part? Yeah? And that's what I did. And as soon as I cut into the rhizome, it was discovered that it was quite heavily infested with Fusarium. And the telltale sign is the dreaded purple ring. So when you cut into the rhizome, you'll have a creamy whitish colour in the centre, followed by a deep purple ring round the outside, followed by the natural coloration of the rhizome. So the purple ring is inside the rhizome, but on the very extremities of it. You very rarely see it throughout the rhizome, because the centre of a rhizome tends to be a bit woody. Yeah, it doesn't get in there. Right, so what is it? It's a fungus, right? It's not a virus like some of the books say. It's a fungus. It spreads like fungus do via spores. Yeah. The problem with this one, this particular fungus, is you don't see it anywhere except for inside the orchid. So you don't see it on the outside. It's not a visible thing. It's not like it grows mushrooms in your pot or anything like that, like some fungi would. So it's invisible for a start until you cut a rhizome. But there are symptoms of a plant that's infected. And sometimes they're not obvious because it can be a very slow thing affecting a plant. But the symptoms are a plant that's doing incredibly well for a while starts to go downhill, often very slowly. So the sort of things you would notice are pseudobulbs not developing as large as they once did on your plant. Now, don't compare a plant nursery grown, force grown under perfect conditions and the size of the bulbs compared with your first bulbs. That might not be a fair test. But a plant that you've, had a while perhaps. So it's lack of vigour. Pseudobulbs not developing as well as they once did. And on Oncidium types, pseudobulbs that regularly produce 2 spikes, one up from each side, suddenly only producing 1 or even none. So it reduces gradually in vigour. And the other telltale sign is that your new roots fail. They don't progress. So they may well start, you get a nice mass of new roots coming out from the base of a growth, but they don't progress. They tend to die off. And they remain short, often with a brown tip, sometimes with brown marks on the roots as well. So those are the signs really: reduced vigour, blooming nowhere near as good as it once did, and root loss basically. So that's the symptoms, that's the signs, and sometimes they're difficult to spot. The more vigorous a plant is, the less dramatic the effect, for a start. And some plants just seem to manage to live with it for an awful long time. But slowly but surely, your plant will go down. Right, how does it work then? It gets into the rhizome and the base of the plant. And if you think about it, that's the point that has to be bypassed, get past. All the nutrition and hydration comes in from the roots and has to get up through the plant into the bulbs and the leaves. And what this fungus does is it blocks those pathways. It stops them dead in their tracks. So your plant can't get hydrated properly, despite having roots, because the roots stop functioning to all intents and purposes. And it can be slow. So, you know, as I said, it can take time. Plants have natural defences, and some plants seem to be pretty good at fighting this off for some considerable time. But the chances are they will never thoroughly defeat it. So it'll always be there lurking. And the time it seems to grab hold of your plant is when the plant gets put under stress. And the biggest stress, or one of the biggest stresses you can put a plant under, is repotting it, unfortunately. So not only is that an ideal time to check and find out you've got it, but it'll also be the time when the fungus can get a better hold because the plant's under stress. So it blocks the pathways. It doesn't really get up in the leaves, it doesn't bother. Its happy place is in the base of the plant, the rhizomes, the base of the pseudobulbs, and the point at which where the roots come out, the base of the plant. That's where it gets. The most prone, I've found, are Oncidium types and the intergenerics and Cattleyas. They seem to be the most prone, but they're also the ones that tend to be relatively vigorous and can hold off against it for a while, but not in all cases. So this Miltonius Sunset was dealt with in December. Yeah, so I ended up with 3 leads, each had a new growth and 2 bulbs. So these are all 3 bulb leads basically that were taken off and then treated and then potted up in the same pot. The logic of them going in the same pot is that if they survive and progress at a phenomenal rate, which I think you'll agree they are doing, yeah, I can lift this out of this pot and just put them in a larger pot because this is fresh media. Yeah, it's only a couple of months old. So it can stay in that pot with its roots attached to whatever bit of bark and moss it's got hold of and just get put in a slightly bigger pot with some room for those roots to extend and these growths have somewhere to be. Okay, so that I would say is successfully recovered. Really good root growth right down into the bottom of the pot, long roots with active growing tips, and the new growths have pushed on quite well. If you want to see this plant at the time the Fusarium was discovered and the treatment that I did, there is a separate playlist on my channel called something like Miltonius with Fusarium, but I'll put a link to it in the description of this bit. So treating it, there are many types of fungicide on the market that deal with surfaces. They're no good. Yeah, so things like mildew, sooty mold, certain types of bacterial rot. There are some fungicides that will deal with that really well. They're not going to touch Fusarium because they're not systemic, and Fusarium is on the inside of the plant, not on the outside on the surfaces, although there could be some spores on the outside on the surfaces, so it'll get them. But once it's inside the plant, the only way you can get at it is a systemic fungicide that's absorbed into the whole plant and gets at it. And although you can kill it off, you can't undo the damage. So the parts of the plant that are bunged up, yeah, never recover. They stay like that. Now, in amongst those pathways that are bunged up are some that are probably still clear enough to get some hydration and nutrients through. Otherwise your plant would have just died. And if it hasn't, then there's still something getting through the base of the plant up into the leaves. But it's severely restricted. That never changes. But what does change is new growths, because they push out clean. They've left the dead stuff behind them. And then eventually, as time goes on, you'll repot your plant again, knowing where the old part of the plant is. And quite honestly, the best thing you can do at your first opportunity is get that old part of the plant off, take it out in the yard and put a flamethrower on it. Stop it getting anywhere else. It does spread through spores, consequently it can be airborne. But this particular fungus likes to be in stuff, so it's mainly a soil-based thing that spreads in amongst media and soil. The way it will get into your plant is through damaged tissue. So unsterilised scissors cut an infected plant and then come and cut a clean one. You've just spread it, as I say. So unsterilised tools and hygiene is a way of getting it about, and the other way is, unfortunately, sharing water. Now that is possible, but not highly likely, because if that was true, I'd have Fusarium in virtually every one of my plants, wouldn't I? Because I do share water. So yes, it's possible, but it's not the main spreader. Where it comes from, under normal circumstances, is from outside. Yeah? That's how it gets in. And the main way it gets in is through new plants. Yeah? You've brought it in on new plants that are already infected. It is possible to spread it around once you've got it, but I haven't found that a major big deal, quite honestly. And in today's age, the main way it gets in is that it comes in on plants already infected. And I think it's because the nurseries have just cut back on costs and they're not treating their plants on a regular basis. And if you think about it, in a nursery, chances are there's some sort of sprinkler system that's watering the plants, and everything gets absolutely soaking wet, and that water drips all over the place, all over other plants, all over staging, wet staging, things like capillary matting. It'll spread through that because it's damp and moist and perfect for the spores to spread and germinate, whatever you want to call it. I think spores germinate. So anyway, that's what it is. Treatment, it needs to be a systemic fungicide, and follow the instructions. On mine, and my one, ideally you want 2 or 3 different types of chemical, of systemic fungicide, and rotate them. It is remotely possible that in your own environment with only one chemical you could produce some immunity to it, but with a fungus, maybe not. Maybe, don't quote me on it one way or the other, but if you can rotate, all the better. I can't, I've only got one, so that's all I can use. And what I do is I mix up the solution in a jug or something, and I stand the plant in it overnight. Yeah? So having got off all the old media, any dead roots or anything, tidy the plant up, I then stand it in the fungicide overnight. And if it stays in there 24 hours, it does no harm. And what that does is gets it right into the plant at the base and in through whatever roots are still working. That's about as good as it gets. And then once I've done that and I pot the plant up, I then use a spray version of that to give the whole plant, leaves, top side, bottom side, everything, a really good soak on the top of the plant. So I've got it in from the bottom, now I've got it in through the top, and that's about as good as you can do. Then you repeat at the associated thing that it'll say on your label. So on mine it says, I think it says 10 to 12 days or something, so I usually go on there, because it's an orchid, err on the side of caution. Don't overdose. If it says well, mine says 4 to 6 mil per litre, so I do 5. You know, just in the middle, yeah. But that's treatment 1, and then if it says treat 10 to 12 days later, do it, yeah. And then somewhere on the label it'll probably say something like no more than 4 treatments in any 1 year. 12 divided by 4 is 3, so in 3 months time it'll get done again. I'll mix up a solution, because it's now in its pot, second time round, and pour it in. Give it a really good soak, yeah, in the pot, and then spray the plant again. And repeat the number of days later. And repeat as necessary. I do a routine treatment now, and this is still getting treated, despite the fact I'm pretty sure it's cured. Well, you can't really say cured, but I've killed it off and stopped it infecting the new bits. The new bits are growing on quite nice. I mean, this was a tiny little new growth when this was potted up, little stubby bit like that. That one's a bit slow, but it's coming on. We do have active roots. And the other two are pushing on quite nicely. And all of this growth is since December. All of this is since December. So, 3.5 months worth of progress. So it can be done. So that's Fusarium, what it's about. Chances are you'll bring it into your environment through plants from outside. Now, I've been talking about the type of orchids with rhizomes that tend to go outwards. Unfortunately, we've got other sorts that go upwards, and that's the like of your Phalaenopsis and your Vandaceous type plants, and they are monopodial. They don't have a rhizome as such. They have a single stem from which roots grow and leaves grow. If you get it in there, just think about the logic. You've only got one pathway from the roots up to the leaves. It's the single stem, and if it gets hold of a plant like that, the chances are you will lose it. Yeah, it's very, very difficult. Very difficult, because there is only that single stem. So even if you discover it, or you think you've got it, and you treat the plant, the bits that are bunged up remain bunged up. They don't suddenly get better. So all you're left with is the bits that weren't bunged up, and that's what the plant will have to live with forevermore. So it's never going to have its proper vigour or strength, and the chances are it will slowly go down. Okay? But these sort that grow relatively vigorously in many directions, you can get at these. Okay, so that's what I know about it. The sort of chemicals you can use if you want what is probably the best list that exists in the world today, and that's not an understatement, is have a look at Anna Maria's channel, Miracle Orchids. She did an incredible amount of research on this subject, and found lots and lots of different low-level chemicals that can work on Fusarium. That's where your list will be. She's even written an ebook about it, yeah, and treatments and everything like that. To me, that is where the main knowledge is on this subject, and where a fair bit of mine came from, quite honestly. I did do a bit of my own research though. So there you go. That's Fusarium. It's a pain, but it's out there. And it may be in your collection and you still don't know. So perhaps, you know, have a think about what you might want to do about that. Telltale sign is when you cut a rhizome and you see that purple ring around the outside of the rhizome. Inside the shell, but round the outside. That's where it shows. And in really bad cases, that purple staining will start moving in towards the centre of the rhizome. And quite honestly, if it's in there that bad, you might not save your plant. But catching it early, dealing with it properly, and your plant may come out the other end strapping and healthy. It can be done. Right, that's that, and that'll be like a reference video, I suppose, and now we'll carry on with the main video.